When you think of 1990s cinema, few films capture the era's energy, weirdness, and unpredictability quite like The Mask. On the surface, it looked like a goofy Jim Carrey comedy, the kind of thing you'd expect to watch on VHS with a bowl of popcorn and a group of friends. But underneath the neon green face paint, the cartoon gags, and the oversized yellow zoot suit, the story of how The Mask came to life is one of the wildest journeys in Hollywood history. It's a tale of comic books drenched in horror, a newcomer who became an overnight superstar, a model who transformed into a silver screen icon, and a studio that gambled on chaos and somehow struck gold. But to truly understand The Mask, you have to go back to where it all began. And surprisingly, it didn't start with laughter. It started with blood, the film most people know. A zany mix of slapstick, comedy, and surreal cartoon physics is a far cry from its original source material. The Mask comics weren't colorful adventures for kids or lighthearted romps for families. They were dark, violent, and dripping with blood. Published by Dark Horse Comics, the original stories were about an ancient mask that didn't give its wearer confidence or charm. Instead, it turned ordinary people into merciless psychopaths. Heads were blown off, bodies mutilated, and the pages read more like The Evil Dead than a Saturday morning cartoon. Early drafts of the film followed that tone. In one version of the script, teenagers wore the mask and became undead monsters, unleashing gruesome carnage across the city. Think less Tex Avery, more George A. Romero. The violence was relentless, with the mask functioning more like a cursed artifact than a comedic prop. Heads exploded, bodies were mutilated, and the atmosphere leaned toward a midnight horror flick, destined for a cult audience rather than mainstream success. If that version had been made, The Mask would have joined the ranks of bloody B-movies rather than becoming a cultural landmark. But then director Chuck Russell entered the picture. Russell, who had previously worked on horror films like A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, saw potential in the madness. He didn't just want gore, he wanted mayhem, a different kind of chaos. Instead of leaning into horror, he rebuilt the script from scratch, reimagining The Mask not as a curse of violence, but as a portal into cartoon lunacy. Out went the zombies, in came the eyeballs popping out of sockets, the tongues rolling across floors, the wild, physics-defying antics inspired by Looney Tunes and Tex Avery classics. This wasn't just a tonal shift, it was a complete genre transplant. The movie pivoted from being a grim, blood-soaked cautionary tale to a surreal fever dream bursting with slapstick, energy, and color. And it was a risk. Comedy of this kind was rarely attempted on such a scale. But Russell understood something important. Horror might have kept The Mask in the shadows, but comedy could push it into the spotlight. By choosing laughter over terror, he gave the story a broader reach, allowing it to attract teenagers, families, and anyone who wanted to see the impossible brought to life. It was dangerous in a new way, not scary, but uncontainable, the kind of chaos that could only be harnessed by someone who already moved like a living cartoon. Enter Jim Carrey. At the time The Mask was casting, Jim Carrey wasn't a movie star. He wasn't even close. Known mostly for his sketches on In Living Color, he had a reputation for outrageous facial contortions, elastic body movements, and impressions that bordered on absurd. But he wasn't proven on the big screen. Studios were still cautious about taking chances on comedians who didn't have box office receipts to back them up. Chuck Russell, however, saw something no one else did. When most executives were scanning lists of safe, bankable actors, Russell got his hands on early footage of Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, a film that hadn't even been released yet. What he saw was astonishing. Carrey wasn't just funny. He was a force of nature, bending his body in ways that seemed impossible, moving with the logic of a cartoon character come to life. Russell realized immediately that this wasn't someone who needed special effects to make magic happen. This was someone who could outperform the visual effects themselves. So before Ace Ventura hit theaters, before Jim Carrey's name meant anything in Hollywood, The Mask took the gamble. They cast him as Stanley Ipkiss, and when Ace Ventura exploded into a surprise hit just weeks later, turning Carrey into the hottest comedy name in town. The gamble looked like pure genius. New Line Cinema had struck gold without even realizing it. They had signed him for just $450,000, a decent payday for a TV comedian, but pocket change compared to what he would soon demand. By the time Dumb and Dumber came out later that same year, Carrey's salary had jumped to $7 million a film. The Mask had locked him in just in time, and with that, a movie that was already strange, risky, and unpredictable suddenly had the perfect star, a man whose very existence blurred the line between human and cartoon. If Jim Carrey's story with The Mask was about a gamble that paid off, Cameron Diaz's story was about a leap of faith so wild it almost never happened. Diaz, at just 21 years old, wasn't an actress, she was a model. She had no acting credits, no training, and no expectations of ever being cast in a major Hollywood film. When she walked into the audition room, it was mostly a formality. The studio's preferred choice was Nicole Smith, a bombshell with fame, notoriety, and name recognition. But once again, Chuck Russell trusted his instincts over Hollywood's playbook. He saw something in Diaz, not just her beauty, but her presence. He believed she could hold her own against Jim Carrey's hurricane of energy. Against all odds, Diaz was cast just 7 days. Before cameras rolled, she had no time to prepare, no acting classes, no training wheels. 1 week she was an unknown model, the next she was standing in front of cameras, opposite one of the most unpredictable comedic performers in history. Her very first scene in the film is still unforgettable, that slow-motion entrance into the Coco Bongo Club, clad in a fiery red dress, every head in the room turning as she walked toward the camera. It wasn't just a character introduction, it was the birth of a star. Practically overnight, Cameron Diaz went from anonymity to being one of Hollywood's most in-demand leading ladies. What makes her story even more remarkable is how natural she seemed on screen. Despite her lack of training, she wasn't intimidated by Carrey's manic improvisation or the constant unpredictability of the set. Instead, she matched his energy in her own subtle way, grounding their chemistry with charm and confidence. Audiences believed in her character not just as a love interest, but as someone who could balance Carrey's wild cartoon energy with real emotion. That balance gave the film its heart, transforming it from a string of gags into a story people actually cared about. By the time the movie wrapped, Diaz had not only proven the director right, she had announced herself as Hollywood's next breakout star. One of the most remarkable things about The Mask is how much of its iconic humor wasn't in the script at all. While the screenplay provided the foundation, Jim Carrey turned every scene into a playground. Lines like "smokin'" and "somebody stop me" weren't meticulously scripted gags. They were moments of improvisation, sudden bursts of Carrey's manic energy that stuck because no one else could have delivered them on set. This created both brilliance and chaos. Crew members struggled to keep straight faces. Take after take had to be reshot because someone behind the camera was laughing too loudly. At times, the director himself broke character, unable to contain his laughter. He knew that Carrey's wildness wasn't a problem, it was the film's greatest strength. The more freedom Carrey had, the more the character of the Mask came alive. Even the visual effects team at Industrial Light and Magic found themselves scrambling to keep up. The green face, the oversized teeth, the whirlwind energy. Carrey did so much of it himself that the computers became a secondary tool rather than the main attraction. In the end, The Mask wasn't just a movie, it was lightning in a bottle. It took a forgotten horror comic, an untested comedian, and a complete unknown model, and spun them into one of the most unforgettable pop culture explosions of the 1990s. It gave us catchphrases we still repeat today, a dance number that lit up living rooms, and a reminder that sometimes the strangest risks bring the biggest rewards. Jim Carrey became a global superstar, Cameron Diaz became Hollywood's newest icon, and a small studio called New Line proved that weird could win. Nearly 3 decades later, the green face, the yellow suit, and the wild cartoon chaos remain, etched into film history. And if this story made you smile, laugh, or remember just how magical movies can be, don't forget, There are plenty more tales like this waiting to be unmasked. So hit that subscribe button, stay tuned, and get ready, because the chaos is only just beginning.